The Xylos Galactic Academy hovered majestically in the void between star systems, its crystalline spires and bioorganic architecture gleaming under the light of distant suns. Unlike traditional educational institutions confined to planetary surfaces, Xylos was a marvel of interstellar engineering, a self-contained academic ecosystem designed to accommodate students from across the known galaxy. The Academy prided itself on hosting the most diverse collection of sentient species in the quadrant. Its corridors buzzed with beings of every imaginable physiological makeup. The crystalline luminites whose bodies channeled and refracted light in dazzling displays. The massive, six-limbed gerons whose exoskeletons could withstand the crushing pressure of gas-giant atmospheres. The telepathic Novali who communicated primarily through brainwave patterns. And dozens more species, each with their own evolutionary advantages. In this remarkable melting pot of advanced biology, one quality was universally admired above all others: evolutionary superiority. The culture at Xylos celebrated biological advantages: strength, regeneration, telepathy, energy manipulation, or sensory capabilities beyond standard measures. These weren't merely appreciated. They were the currency of status and respect, which made the newest addition to the student body all the more perplexing. When I first saw the human, I couldn't believe the administration had made such an obvious mistake. My name is Xyler, a third-cycle student from the Cthar system. My people possess a chitinous exoskeleton capable of deflecting most conventional projectiles, and we can sense energy patterns that most species cannot perceive. Not the most impressive adaptations at Xylos, but respectable enough to secure my place in the Academy's hierarchy. The human, Alex Ryder, as his enrollment file identified him, stood out immediately, though not in any way that garnered respect. He was of average height for his species, with a frame that appeared alarmingly fragile to most non-human eyes. His skin was soft and vulnerable, with no apparent natural armor or defensive capabilities. His sensory organs were limited and clustered inefficiently on his face. His muscles, while symmetrically arranged, showed no evidence of enhanced strength. That's the Ambassador Program's new pet project, whispered Rax, a hulking Geron whose midnight blue exoskeleton creaked as he leaned toward me during orientation. First human to ever attend Xylos. Apparently, they're trying to be more inclusive of developing species. I studied the human more carefully. There was nothing particularly remarkable about him. He wore the standard Academy uniform, gray with departmental color trim, and carried a standard-issue data tablet. The only unusual feature was a small fabric pouch attached to his belt, which seemed to contain personal items. How did he even pass the entrance exams? I asked, genuinely curious. They require baseline adaptability to at least 3 hostile environments. Rax's mandibles clicked in the Geron equivalent of a dismissive snort. Technological assistance, obviously. Their species is supposedly good with machines. That first day set the tone for how most students viewed Alex. He was a curiosity at best, a misplaced charity case at worst, something to be observed with scientific detachment or mild amusement rather than respect. The physical training session the following day only reinforced these impressions. The Academy's adaptation chamber could simulate various planetary conditions, and today it was replicating the high-gravity environment of Toral Prime. As a Cthar, I found the 1.8 G simulation challenging but manageable. Rax and other Gerons barely noticed the difference. The Luminites struggled somewhat, but compensated by redistributing their crystalline mass. Alex, however, was clearly suffering. His movements were labored, his breathing heavy. Most alarming to those watching, his skin began to excrete a clear liquid that glistened under the chamber's lights. "Is he melting?" asked a concerned Novali student, her telepathic broadcast tinged with disgusted fascination. "No, it's called sweating," explained our physical adaptation instructor, Professor Zinnick. "It's a human thermoregulation mechanism. Perfectly normal, if primitive." When Alex finally completed the obstacle course, finishing dead last by a significant margin, his face had turned an alarming reddish hue, and the sweating had intensified. He collapsed onto a bench, chest heaving in rapid, shallow motions that many mistook for respiratory distress. "Should someone call medical?" asked another student. "He's fine," Professor Zenik assured us. "Humans have inefficient oxygen processing. This is their normal recovery procedure." Later that day, I overheard several students in the common area starting a betting pool on how long the human would last at Xylos. The most generous estimate was 1 full academic cycle. Most gave him a month at most. The most vocal detractor wasn't a student, but a faculty member, Dr. Forlag, who taught comparative biology. A centauri with 6 eyes arranged in a ring around his bulbous head, Dr. Forlag was renowned for his data-driven approach to evaluating species capabilities. The inclusion of a human specimen in our student body presents an interesting academic case study, he announced during our first class meeting, his neutral tone barely masking his skepticism. For today's discussion, we will examine where Homo sapiens falls on the galactic survival spectrum. What followed was a methodical, dispassionate dissection of human biological limitations. Dr. Forlag's presentation included detailed charts comparing human strength, sensory perception, resilience, and regenerative capabilities against those of other sentient species. In nearly every category, humans ranked near the bottom of the scale. Note particularly their remarkable lack of redundancy, Dr. Forlag highlighted, displaying a detailed anatomical scan. A single circulatory pump, a respiratory system vulnerable to countless airborne toxins, no backup organs, limited regenerative capabilities. From an evolutionary perspective, it's quite fascinating they achieved sentience at all before their numerous biological vulnerabilities led to extinction. I glanced at Alex, seated 2 rows ahead of me. His face remained impassive, but I noticed a slight tension in his posture. He was listening, absorbing the clinical dissection of his species' apparent inferiority, but offering no defense. Perhaps their technological aptitude compensates for biological deficiencies, suggested a Luminite student. A valid hypothesis, Dr. Forlag conceded, though one might argue that truly superior species wouldn't require such extensive technological crutches for basic survival. As the class ended, the announcement system chimed, and the academy director's voice filled the room. "Attention, all comparative biology students. Tomorrow's laboratory session will feature specimens recently collected from Nexus 9. These organisms display unusual defensive mechanisms and should be handled with extreme caution. Proper safety protocols will be mandatory." That is all. A ripple of excitement passed through the students. Nexus 9 was a frontier world, recently discovered and only partially cataloged. Its ecosystem was renowned for producing organisms with particularly unique evolutionary adaptations. Even Dr. Forlag's compound eyes seemed to gleam with scientific interest. As we filed out of the classroom, I noticed Alex consulting his data tablet, researching Nexus 9's known biological profiles with intent focus. For a moment, I wondered what it must be like to be him, surrounded by beings who viewed his very existence as an evolutionary misstep, a cosmic accident unworthy of the advanced education Xylos provided. I quickly dismissed the thought. Sympathy wasn't a particularly valued trait among Thar, and I had my own studies to worry about. The following day, we gathered in Laboratory Complex 7, a sterile white environment filled with the most advanced biological research equipment in the quadrant. Transparent containment units lined the walls, each housing specimens in carefully controlled environments. Holographic data streams floated above each unit, displaying real-time information about the contained organisms. "Students, gather around," Dr. Forlag instructed, standing beside a sealed cylindrical chamber at the center of the lab. Today we examine specimen XN42, colloquially termed the spine flinger by the initial survey team. Inside the chamber, a creature approximately the size of my forearm crawled along the bottom. It resembled a cross between an arachnid and a succulent plant, with a segmented body covered in what appeared to be fleshy leaves. Its multiple legs ended in adhesive pads that allowed it to climb the chamber walls with ease. The spine flinger demonstrates an unusual defensive mechanism, Dr. Forlag explained. When threatened, it can launch modified epidermal barbs with remarkable precision. These barbs contain a mild neurotoxin, not lethal to most sentient species, but certainly uncomfortable. Your assignment is to document its threat response triggers and targeting mechanisms. We were divided into research pairs. To my surprise and evident discomfort, Rax was paired with Alex. The massive Jaren made no effort to hide his displeasure, his exoskeleton plates shifting in annoyance. Remember, Dr. Forlag emphasized, these specimens are safely contained in Class 4 biofields. However, exercise appropriate caution when approaching the observation ports. Maintain proper distance and use the remote manipulators for all interactions. Each pair was assigned a specimen chamber and a set of research parameters. I was paired with a no-volley student named Alara, and our specimen appeared. Docile enough, seemingly more interested in consuming the nutrient gel provided than demonstrating its defensive capabilities. From across the lab, I could hear Rax's booming voice as he dominated his partnership with Alex, insisting on controlling the remote manipulators himself. I've handled toxic specimens on 6 different worlds, the Jaren boasted. My exoskeleton can resist corrosives that would dissolve your soft tissues in seconds. Alex didn't argue, instead focusing on documenting the creature's baseline behaviors as Rax manipulated the specimen's environment, attempting to provoke a defensive response. What happened next occurred so quickly that accounts later varied. Rax, growing impatient with the creature's lack of reaction, increased the stimulation beyond recommended parameters. He adjusted the manipulator arms with excessive force, causing a brief power fluctuation in the containment field. It was only a microsecond disruption, not enough for full containment failure, but sufficient to create a small field distortion. The spine flinger reacted instantly. It contorted its body and launched a barrage of needle-like projections. Most were absorbed by the partially compromised field, but 3 penetrated completely, and one found its mark in Alex's forearm, slicing deeply through his uniform and into the flesh beneath. "Containment breach," someone shouted. The lab erupted in controlled chaos. Students backed away from their stations. Emergency protocols activated automatically, reinforcing all containment fields and flooding the lab with decontamination agents. Everyone remained calm. Dr. Forlag commanded, rapidly approaching Alex and Rax's station. "Medical response team has been notified. No sudden movements." I expected panic from a human, screaming, perhaps, or at least visible distress. Instead, Alex looked down at his arm with an expression of calm assessment. Blood, bright red and alarmingly copious, flowed from a gash approximately 7 centimeters long and deep enough to reveal the pale structures beneath his skin. "Step back, human," Dr. Forlag instructed, reaching for an emergency medical scanner. "The neurotoxin effects on your species are unknown. We must neutralize it immediately." To everyone's astonishment, Alex shook his head. The spine didn't contain venom. It was just a mechanical projectile, a physical deterrent, not a chemical one. His voice was steady, his breathing controlled. "How could you possibly know that?" demanded Dr. Forlag. "The specimen's barbs have different coloration patterns. The ones with neurotoxin have a darker tip. This was a primary defense barb, not a toxic one." Alex nodded toward his data tablet, which displayed his research notes. "I documented the difference earlier." Dr. Forlag blinked all 6 eyes in rapid succession, a sign of surprise among Centauri. "Nevertheless, you require immediate medical attention. That wound. If I could just access my personal kit," Alex interrupted, gesturing toward the small pouch on his belt. "I can handle this." The laboratory had fallen completely silent now. Every student watched with fascination as Alex removed a compact metallic container from his belt pouch. He placed it on the workstation and opened it to reveal a collection of primitive-looking tools and materials. They were clearly not Academy-issue equipment. The design was distinctly human, with none of the biomimetic aesthetics common to galactic standard medical supplies. "What is that archaic collection?" Rax asked, mandibles twitching nervously. Despite his earlier bravado, The gerund seemed disturbed by the blood, now staining the workstation. "A basic first aid kit," Alex replied, selecting a small vial of clear liquid. "Standard equipment for human explorers." What followed was one of the most extraordinary demonstrations I had witnessed at Xylos. With methodical precision, Alex cleaned the wound using the antiseptic liquid. Then, producing a curved needle and thread-like material, he proceeded to do something that sent ripples of shock through every observing student. He began to stitch his own flesh together. Using his uninjured hand to hold the wound closed, Alex pierced his skin with a needle, drawing the thread through in a neat, practiced motion. His face showed minimal reaction, just a slight tightening around the eyes with each puncture. No pain suppression field, no neural blockers, no automated medical assistance, just primitive tools and an almost incomprehensible tolerance for pain. Stitch after stitch, he closed the wound. The process took perhaps 3 minutes, but it felt much longer as we all watched in stunned silence. When finished, he cut the thread with a small pair of scissors, applied a sterile pad to the site, and wrapped it with an adhesive bandage. Only then did he look up, seemingly surprised by the stunned expression surrounding him. "What?" he asked, his tone genuinely perplexed. Before anyone could respond, the medical response team burst into the laboratory, equipped with advanced trauma gear. They pulled up short at the sight of Alex, calmly putting away his primitive medical kit. The situation apparently resolved. The head medic, a Balerian with translucent skin through which complex circulatory patterns were visible, approached cautiously. After scanning Alex's arm, she turned to address Dr. Forlag, professional bewilderment evident in her phosphorescent eyes. "The wound has been adequately treated," she admitted, though her tone suggested she found the method barbaric. "The closure is surprisingly effective, though our regenerative gel would have." "Is there a risk of infection?" Dr. Forlag interrupted. "Minimal. The antiseptic applied appears quite effective, if crude." She turned to Alex. "You should report to the medical bay for proper treatment with regenerative compounds. This procedure will leave unnecessary scarring." "The scar won't impair function," Alex replied with a slight shrug. "And I'd rather not waste advanced medical resources on a minor injury." The medic seemed about to argue, but then nodded stiffly. "As you wish. Monitor for signs of infection. Report any changes in sensation or mobility immediately." After the medical team departed, the laboratory remained unusually quiet. Students returned to their stations, but attention repeatedly drifted toward Alex, who had resumed his observational work as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. As the session ended, Dr. Forlag approached Alex's workstation. The professor's usual clinical detachment had given way to undisguised scientific curiosity. "Human, writer, a moment of your time," he requested. When Alex looked up, the professor continued, "That was unexpected. Is such self-treatment common among your species?" Alex considered the question. "Basic medical self-sufficiency is part of our standard education, especially for those who work in isolated environments or exploration. It's not particularly remarkable. But the pain response. You displayed minimal reaction to stimuli that would incapacitate many sentient species." "Pain is just information," Alex replied simply. "Humans have learned to process that information without letting it override necessary functions." Rax, who had been hovering nearby with an uncharacteristic meekness, finally spoke. "I must acknowledge my error in manipulator operation," he said formally. "The containment breach was a result of my excessive force application." It was as close to an apology as a gerund could manage without losing face entirely. Alex nodded in acceptance. "Equipment malfunctions happen," he said. "No lasting harm done." As students filed out of the laboratory, the atmosphere had subtly but unmistakably shifted. Glances toward Alex were no longer dismissive or pitying. They carried a new quality. Assessment, reconsideration, perhaps even a hint of respect. I lingered, watching as Alex completed his documentation with the same focused efficiency he'd shown while stitching his own flesh. The question that had briefly crossed my mind the previous day returned with greater intensity. What was it like to be him? To be surrounded by beings who considered you biologically inferior, yet to possess capabilities they could scarcely comprehend? For the first time, I wondered if we had been measuring strength by entirely the wrong metrics. By the next cycle, the story had spread throughout Xylos. The account grew with each retelling. In some versions, the wound was twice as large. In others, Alex had continued his research one-handed while stitching himself with the other. The basic facts, however, remained consistent. A human student had sustained an injury that would have sent most species to emergency medical care, and had instead repaired it himself with primitive tools and extraordinary composure. I entered the communal dining hall to find the usual species-segregated seating arrangements disrupted. A diverse group had gathered around one table, where Alex sat answering questions between bites of synthesized protein adapted for human digestion. "Not unique to me," he was saying as I approached. "Most humans with proper training could do the same." "But doesn't your species have automated medical technology?" asked a Luminite, her crystalline form refracting light in patterns indicating intense curiosity. "Of course," Alex nodded. "In populated areas, we use advanced medical care like anyone else. But humans often work in environments where technology might fail or be unavailable. Self-reliance is part of our core training." "What about the pain?" asked another student. "Did you use some form of mental technique to suppress it?" Alex considered this. "Yes and no. We don't have biological pain suppression, but we train to compartmentalize it, to acknowledge the sensation without letting it dominate our cognitive functions." I found a seat at the edge of the group, listening intently. Rax entered the hall and hesitated, his massive form uncharacteristically uncertain. After a moment, he approached Alex's table. "Ryder," the Jaren said, formal but with new undertones of respect. "The Xenobiology Study Group meets this evening. Your observational notes on the spine flinger were precise. Your participation would be valuable." The invitation, coming from a student who had previously viewed Alex with barely concealed disdain, marked another shift in the Academy's social dynamics. Alex accepted with a nod, seemingly taking these changes in stride. Later that day, I attended Dr. Forlag's lecture, curious whether the laboratory incident would influence his academic perspective. I wasn't disappointed. The professor had significantly revised his presentation materials. Today we examine an often overlooked aspect of evolutionary advantage. Dr. Forlag began, activating the holographic display. Instead of the usual charts comparing physical attributes, the display showed a complex matrix of interconnected factors. Traditional metrics of biological superiority focus on quantifiable aspects: strength, speed, sensory acuity, natural weaponry, or defense mechanisms, he continued. However, recent observations suggest we must expand our analytical framework to include less easily quantified attributes. The holographic display shifted to highlight new categories: psychological resilience, problem-solving under duress, pain management, adaptive skill acquisition. Consider species that evolved on planets with extreme environmental variability, Dr. Forlag suggested. Rather than developing specialized biological adaptations to specific conditions, some may instead evolve exceptional psychological adaptability and knowledge retention capacities. Though he never explicitly mentioned humans or the laboratory incident, the implication was clear. Dr. Forlag was reconstructing his theoretical framework to accommodate what he had witnessed. A species physiologically unremarkable, yet possessing capabilities that couldn't be explained by traditional evolutionary metrics. As the academic cycle progressed, Alex's position at the Academy underwent a subtle transformation. The initial dismissal had given way to a kind of mythologized respect. Stories of this self-stitching human had transformed into tales of an almost supernatural pain tolerance. Some younger students whispered that humans could continue functioning with multiple limbs severed or could survive in vacuum without protection, claims Alex repeatedly attempted to correct, with limited success. "I'm not a biological marvel," I overheard him explaining to a group of first-cycle students who had cornered him in the library. "Humans are actually quite fragile compared to most species here. We've just developed ways to work around our limitations. But the mystique persisted, and with it came new pressures. Students from combat-oriented species began to view Alex as a potential sparring partner who might offer unique challenges. Academic researchers from the medical division sought tissue samples to study human pain response mechanisms. Even the Academy administration seemed to take new interest, monitoring his performance metrics with unexpected attention. The attention clearly made Alex uncomfortable. He had come to Xylos to study, not to become a curiosity or research subject. I began to notice him seeking quieter corners of the Academy, spending more time in the observatory or the less frequented sections of the botanical gardens. It was in the latter location that I finally approached him directly, driven by a curiosity I could no longer ignore. "Your species remains puzzling," I said without preamble, settling beside him on a bench overlooking a collection of bioluminescent flora from the Centauri systems. Alex glanced at me, a slight smile touching his lips. "Your directness is refreshing, Xyler." I was surprised he knew my name. We'd never been formally introduced. "Most Kthar are direct," I replied. "It's more efficient." "True, but most haven't bothered speaking to me at all." I acknowledged this with a click of my mandibles. "Your demonstration in the laboratory raised questions. I seek answers." "About stitching a cut?" He raised an eyebrow. "It's really not that impressive. Ancient humans were doing it thousands of years before we developed advanced medicine." "Not about the technique," I clarified. "About the contradiction. Your species appears physically vulnerable by every standard metric, yet you display capabilities that suggest otherwise. It is inconsistent." Alex was quiet for a moment, considering the glowing plants before us. Their luminescence shifted in patterns determined by subtle atmospheric changes, an evolutionary response to their native environment's toxic gas emissions. "May I ask you something, Xyler?" he finally said. "What's the most hostile environment you've ever survived?" The question caught me off guard. "The methane swamps of Varix 3, I answered after brief consideration. "A training exercise in my second academic cycle. Caustic atmosphere, extreme pressure gradients, indigenous predators with silicon-based exoskeletons." "And how did you prepare for that environment?" "Specialized equipment. Atmospheric converters. Pressure stabilizers. Standard procedures." Alex nodded. "Now imagine your species evolve on a world where conditions change so rapidly and dramatically that developing biological specializations for any particular threat was impossible. Instead, you developed something else, the ability to create tools, to retain and transmit knowledge across generations, to endure discomfort while solving problems." He gestured toward his bandaged arm. "This isn't remarkable to humans because our entire evolutionary history is defined by compensating for our physical limitations. We can't regrow limbs, so we learn to prevent blood loss and fight infection. We can't breathe water, so we built vessels to cross oceans. We can't survive extreme temperatures, so we created controlled environments." I processed this perspective. "You're suggesting that technological adaptation is itself a biological trait." "I'm suggesting that problem-solving, knowledge retention, and psychological resilience are biological traits," he corrected. "Technology is just one manifestation of those traits." Our conversation might have continued, but it was interrupted by a sudden, blaring alarm. The Academy's emergency alert system. The calm voice of the central AI cut through the warning tones. "Attention all Xylos personnel and students. A critical malfunction has been detected in the Dimensional Physics Laboratory, Section 12B. Containment protocols have been activated. All personnel in adjacent sections must evacuate immediately." This is not a drill. The Botanical Gardens emergency lighting activated, illuminating evacuation pathways. Alex and I exchanged glances before joining the stream of students heading toward designated safety areas. "What's in Section 12B?" Alex asked as we moved. "The experimental phase shift generators," I replied, my sensory appendages already detecting unusual energy fluctuations. They were testing boundary conditions between dimensional states. The implications were concerning. Phase shift technology was still largely theoretical, allowing matter to exist partially in alternate dimensional states. A containment failure could have unpredictable effects on local spacetime. We had nearly reached the main evacuation corridor when a secondary alarm sounded, followed by another announcement. Warning, containment field instability detected in environmental systems adjacent to Section 12B. Automatic bulkheads activating in 30 seconds. All personnel must clear affected corridors immediately. The student flow became more urgent. Ahead, I could see the massive emergency bulkheads beginning their slow descent, designed to seal off sections of the academy in the event of catastrophic system failures. We were among the last group approaching the bulkhead when disaster struck. A surge of displaced energy from the failing containment systems raced through the academy's power conduits. The corridor lights flickered, and the bulkhead mechanism suddenly accelerated, dropping much faster than its safety protocol should have allowed. A young Novali student stumbled ahead of us, disoriented by the energy surge that had temporarily disrupted her telepathic senses. She would be trapped on the wrong side of the bulkhead, potentially in an area about to experience dimensional instability. Alex moved without hesitation. He sprinted forward, reached the fallen student, and physically lifted her, an impressive feat given the Novali's density. With remarkable speed, he half-carried, half-dragged her toward the narrowing gap beneath the descending bulkhead. At the last possible moment, he pushed her through to safety, but the gap had become too small for him to follow. The bulkhead slammed down with a resonating thud, sealing Alex on the isolated side of the corridor, along with me and 3 other students who hadn't made it through. Situation assessment, I said immediately, falling back on Kthar emergency protocols. Who is present? Besides Alex and myself, our trap group included a Jaren engineering student named Voss, a Luminite named Teria, and a mechanical organic hybrid student called Plex whose species originated from the Andromedan satellite galaxies. Communications are down, Voss reported, checking a wall terminal. Local systems only. Environmental controls are fluctuating, added Teria, her crystalline form already adapting to detect atmospheric changes. Nothing dangerous yet, but trending toward instability. The emergency lighting cast everything in a dim red glow. Through the walls, I could feel the distinctive vibration pattern of containment field generators operating at maximum capacity, never a reassuring sign. We need to reach an emergency shelter, I decided. Standard protocol during containment failures. The nearest shelter is 2 sections away. Plex noted, their partly mechanical body interfacing directly with a data port, and the direct route is blocked by the bulkhead. There's maintenance access through the ventilation system, Voss suggested, pointing to an access panel near the ceiling. It's how engineering crews navigate during hull breaches. The panel was nearly 3 meters high, easily accessible for a Jaren with their height and climbing abilities, but challenging for the rest of us. I'll go first and help the others, Voss offered, already extending his limbs to reach the panel. As the Jaren worked on the access panel, I noticed Alex examining our surroundings with focused intensity. He wasn't panicking or showing signs of stress. Instead, he seemed to be systematically analyzing our situation. The dimensional containment failure. What exactly were they working on in that lab, he asked. Plex answered, their vocoder producing precisely modulated tones. Experimental phase shift technology. Attempting to create stable matter that exists simultaneously in multiple dimensional states. And what happens during containment failure? Unpredictable dimensional bleeding, Teria explained, her crystalline voice tinged with concern. Local space-time distortions. Potentially, temporary ruptures in reality itself. Alex nodded, processing this information. So we're not just dealing with physical danger like radiation or explosive decompression. We're potentially facing altered physics in our immediate environment. Correct, I confirmed, which is why standard procedure is to reach a dimensionally shielded emergency shelter. Voss had managed to remove the access panel, revealing a network of maintenance tunnels. I can navigate these, he announced, but some sections might be too narrow for my exoskeleton. That presented a new problem. We needed Voss's strength and engineering knowledge, but the Geren's massive frame might become an obstacle in the confined space. We need a different approach, Alex said suddenly. Voss, instead of entering the tunnels, can you access the environmental control subsystems from here? Maybe through that maintenance terminal? The Geren considered this. Possibly. But what would that accomplish? If the dimensional containment is failing, there must be emergency protocols to stabilize it, or at least to prevent it from spreading to adjacent sections. If we can access those systems, maybe we can create a safe path to the emergency shelter or even help contain the original breach. It was a logical suggestion, but not without risk. Interfering with emergency systems during an active containment scenario violates Academy safety protocols, I pointed out. So does being trapped in a potentially reality-warping section with no communication or escape route, Alex countered. Standard protocols assume standard conditions. This situation isn't standard. There was a brief silence as we considered our options. Then Plex spoke up. The human's reasoning is sound. My systems detect increasing dimensional instability. Waiting for external rescue may expose us to unacceptable risk. I can help with the system access, Teria offered. Luminites can channel and direct energy flows. I might be able to stabilize power fluctuations long enough for Voss to work. A plan began to form. Voss would attempt to access the environmental systems through the maintenance terminal. Teria would help stabilize the increasingly erratic energy flows. Plex, with their partially mechanical nature, could interface directly with certain systems to bypass security protocols. I could use my Kthar energy sensing abilities to detect and warn of dangerous dimensional fluctuations before they manifested physically. And Alex? He seemed to naturally fall into the role of coordinator, not by asserting authority, but by asking the right questions, synthesizing our different perspectives, and helping us focus on immediate priorities. Let's establish a clear objective hierarchy, he suggested. Priority 1 is survival, preventing dimensional effects from reaching our position. Priority 2 is communication, re-establishing contact with emergency response teams. Priority 3 is containment assistance, helping to resolve the original breach if possible. We all agreed to this framework and set to work. Voss and Plex began disassembling the maintenance terminal, while Teria positioned herself to channel and stabilize the energy flows they would need. I extended my sensory appendages to maximum sensitivity, creating an early warning system for dimensional anomalies. The situation quickly proved even more dangerous than anticipated. My sensors detected waves of dimensional instability approaching our section, moments when the very fabric of reality seemed to ripple and distort. Incoming fluctuation, I warned as the first major wave approached. 3, 2, 1. The corridor around us briefly shimmered, as if underwater. Gravity fluctuated momentarily, causing us to float centimeters above the floor before crashing back down. A section of wall seemed to phase partially out of existence, revealing glimpses of impossible geometries before solidifying again. That was just the edge of a pulse, I reported. The center would have been much more intense. We felt it in the systems, Voss confirmed, his exoskeleton clicking nervously. Power conduits are beginning to degrade. Some are existing in multiple states simultaneously. Can we establish a dimensional buffer? Alex asked, completely calm despite the reality literally warping around us. Something to absorb or deflect these fluctuations? Plex's optical sensors brightened. The Academy's maintenance systems include portable containment fields for hazardous material transport. If we could access the emergency equipment storage. 2 sections down, near the shelter, Voss completed. But we need to pass through areas potentially compromised by dimensional fluctuations. Another wave hit, stronger this time. For several seconds, sound behaved strangely. Our voices echoed as if we were speaking in vast caverns, then compressed to near inaudibility. A portion of the floor briefly aged centuries and seconds, corroding and crumbling before reverting to its normal state. The fluctuations are increasing in intensity and frequency, I observed. We cannot remain here. Alex's expression was focused, analytical. He wasn't showing fear, just processing problems and identifying solutions. Plex, can you access the Academy's structural schematics? We need to know if there's any route to that equipment storage that minimizes exposure to the lab section. The hybrid student interfaced with the terminal again. There's a maintenance crawlway through the outer hull section. It's designed to remain structurally consistent even during spatial anomalies because it connects to the Academy's dimensional anchor points. That sounds promising, Alex nodded. Where's the access point? Through the environmental control junction, 2 corridors from here, Plex replied. But the route passes directly through a zone already showing significant dimensional instability. It was a desperate option, but potentially our only viable path forward. The dimensional fluctuations were intensifying around our current position. Soon, they might render the entire section uninhabitable, or worse, permanently alter anything caught within them. We'll need protection to pass through the unstable zone, I said. Something to shield us from the worst effects. The utility closet in the adjacent corridor, Voss suggested. It should contain emergency environment suits. They're designed to provide limited protection against various hazards. Protection against dimensional fluctuations? Teria asked skeptically, her crystalline form dimming with concern. Not specifically, Voss admitted, but they include basic field generators that might offer some buffer against minor instabilities. We moved cautiously to the utility closet, with me constantly monitoring for approaching anomaly waves. Inside, we found 5 emergency suits, standard Academy issue, designed to accommodate various physiologies. They weren't perfect solutions for any of us, but they were adaptable enough to provide basic protection. The suits for Voss and me required minimal adjustments. Terria's crystalline form posed more challenges, but she managed to adapt the suit's field to encompass her structure. Plex's hybrid nature proved most compatible with the technology, allowing for direct interface with the suit systems. Alex's suit, however, was clearly not designed with human physiology in mind. The proportions were wrong, with limb segments too long and joint articulations positioned incorrectly. He struggled to make the necessary adjustments. This will significantly impair my mobility, he observed, without complaint or frustration, simply analyzing the problem. Can we modify it? Teria asked. Alex was already examining the suit's construction. The field generators are the essential components. If we could remove them and create a more compact configuration. What followed was another demonstration of human adaptability. Using tools from his belt pouch, the same one that had contained his medical kit, Alex quickly disassembled portions of the suit, extracting the key protective components. With Plex's assistance, he reconfigured them into a more streamlined arrangement that could be worn over his Academy uniform. It won't provide full protection, he acknowledged, but it should be sufficient to get through the affected areas. With our makeshift protection in place, we proceeded toward the environmental control junction, following Plex's directions. The corridors showed increasing signs of dimensional instability, sections of wall that shimmered with strange energies, patches of flooring that seemed to age and decay before returning to normal, occasional objects that appeared to exist in multiple states simultaneously. We had almost reached the junction when a massive fluctuation wave hit, far stronger than any previous pulse. The entire corridor seemed to twist, with reality itself becoming fluid and uncertain. Gravity shifted unpredictably, sound distorted into incomprehensible patterns. Light behaved according to physics that didn't belong in our universe. I felt my consciousness straining to process the impossible sensory information. My chitinous exoskeleton, evolved to protect against physical threats, offered no defense against reality itself becoming unstable. Through the disorientation, I was vaguely aware of my companions experiencing similar effects. Voss stumbling as his massive form was subjected to contradictory gravitational forces. Terria's crystalline structure briefly phasing in and out of normal space. Plex's systems temporarily disrupting as they encountered uncomputable conditions. Alex, despite his more limited protection, remained surprisingly functional. He moved with deliberate purpose, anchoring himself against a wall section that appeared relatively stable. As the wave began to subside, he was already checking on each of us, helping Voss regain balance, verifying Plex's systems were rebooting correctly. "Everyone intact?" he asked, his voice steady despite what we'd just experienced. "Functional," Plex confirmed. "But my analytical systems indicate that was only a precursor. A significantly larger dimensional event is building in the laboratory." "How much time?" Alex asked. "Approximately 12 minutes before the cascade reaches critical threshold," Plex replied. "At that point, permanent reality alterations become probable in adjacent sections." The implication was clear. We needed to reach the emergency shelter before that cascade hit, or we might be permanently altered by the dimensional distortions. "The junction is just ahead," Voss said, pointing toward a sealed doorway. "But my sensors indicate extreme instability in the control room itself. The maintenance crawlway access is on the far side." We faced a terrible choice: remain in our current position and almost certainly be caught in the coming dimensional cascade, or pass through a control room already experiencing severe reality distortions to reach potential safety. "We need to assess the exact nature of the distortions before entering," Alex said. "If we understand the pattern, we might find a safe path through." Teria moved forward, her crystalline structure allowing her to sense energy patterns beyond the visible spectrum. She pressed against the sealed door, parts of her form changing color as she processed what she detected. "The distortions are not random," she reported. "They're following the power conduit paths through the room. There are stable zones between the conduits, narrow but navigable." "Can you map these stable zones?" Alex asked. Teria concentrated, her entire form glowing with effort as she extended her senses. After several seconds, she projected a three-dimensional light pattern, a ghostly map of the control room beyond, with power conduits shown as pulsing red lines and the relatively stable areas between them as blue corridors. "The stable zones shift as the power fluctuates," she warned. "This map is accurate only for the current state. It could change at any moment." "Then we move quickly, following the blue paths precisely," Alex decided. Voss in front with his structural reinforcement, then Teria to provide ongoing mapping, then Plex, myself, and Xyler in the rear to monitor for approaching fluctuation waves. The logic was sound. As a Kthar, my sensory abilities would give us the best warning of approaching dimensional pulses. Voss's natural armor provided the best protection against unexpected distortions. Teria's ongoing mapping was essential for navigation. Plex's hybrid systems could interface with any functional technology we encountered. And Alex? Once again, he had naturally assumed the role of coordinator, not through assertion of authority, but through quick analysis and clear communication that maximized our collective capabilities. We entered the control room in our designated formation. The reality distortions were immediately apparent and deeply unsettling. Portions of equipment existed in multiple states simultaneously, both intact and destroyed, powered and unpowered. Sections of flooring and ceiling had merged or swapped positions. In one corner, a workstation seemed to be experiencing time at a different rate than its surroundings, with displays flickering between past, present, and possible future states. Following Teria's glowing blue pathway, we navigated through this nightmarish landscape of broken physics. Twice we had to halt and recalculate our route as power surges caused the stable zones to shift. Once, Voss had to physically hold a section of reality in place, his massive strength somehow allowing him to temporarily stabilize a portion of wall that was phasing in and out of existence. We had nearly reached the far side when disaster struck. A minor fluctuation, barely registered on my senses, caused a portion of ceiling to briefly exist in two places at once. The second manifestation materialized directly in Plex's path. The hybrid student's upper body passed through the anomaly before any of us could react. The effect was immediate and horrifying. Plex's mechanical components separated from their organic components, existing momentarily in different dimensional states. When reality reasserted itself, the integration was imperfect, systems misaligned, connections severed or cross-linked incorrectly. Plex collapsed, their vocal synthesizer emitting garbled static as system errors cascaded through their hybrid form. Catastrophic system failure. They managed to communicate before their vocal systems failed completely. Their optical sensors flickered erratically, then dimmed to a dull emergency power mode. Alex was at Plex's side instantly. Teria, maintain the path mapping. Voss, secure our exit route. Xyler, monitor for incoming waves. He issued these instructions while already examining Plex's damaged systems. I was astonished by his response. Most beings, faced with the horror of seeing a companion partially dimensionally disrupted, would freeze or panic. Alex instead imposed immediate order on the situation, allowing each of us to focus on essential tasks while he addressed the emergency. Their core consciousness is intact, Alex reported after a rapid assessment. But the integration between organic and mechanical systems has been severely compromised. Without proper realignment, permanent damage will result. The maintenance crawlway is just through that access panel, Voss reported. We could carry Plex to the emergency shelter where proper medical equipment. No time, Alex interrupted. Look, he pointed to Plex's exposed systems, where we could all see a disturbing progression. Mechanical components gradually shifting out of alignment with organic components, connections deteriorating as the dimensional damage spread. If we don't stabilize this now, their consciousness matrix will fragment beyond recovery, Alex explained. I need tools and power. Once again, the small pouch at his belt proved to contain unexpected resources. Alex produced several precision instruments, entirely mechanical, with no electronic components that might be affected by the dimensional instabilities. From a nearby workstation that still had partial functionality, he salvaged power couplings and diagnostic sensors. Teria, I need your energy channeling abilities, he said. Can you direct a stable power flow into these connection points? The Luminite hesitated only briefly before positioning herself to assist. I've never interfaced with hybrid technology before. Just focus on maintaining consistent energy levels, Alex instructed. Voss, I'll need your precision grip for these smaller components. What followed was an extraordinary improvised procedure. Using salvaged equipment, manual tools, and his companion's unique abilities, Alex began to realign Plex's disrupted systems. His hands moved with surprising dexterity, manipulating components so small they were barely visible. He worked methodically, occasionally muttering technical terms that seemed beyond his expected knowledge base. Neural pathway realignment complete, he announced after several intense minutes. Initiating system reintegration. Plex's optical sensors flickered, then gradually brightened to their normal intensity. Their vocoder emitted a series of test tones before stabilizing. Systems recovering, they managed to communicate. Ow! Emergency field repair, Alex explained, already helping Plex to an upright position. It's temporary. You'll need proper medical attention once we reach safety, but this should maintain system integrity until then. But how did you know the procedure? Plex asked, clearly struggling to process what had happened. Hybrid technology is unique to my species. I didn't know the specifics, Alex admitted, but the principles are similar to other integration systems I've studied. The key was recognizing which connections were critical for consciousness maintenance versus peripheral functions. There was no time for further discussion. My sensory appendages detected a massive energy buildup approaching, the dimensional cascade Plex had predicted earlier. We need to move now, I warned. The main event is imminent. With Voss and Alex supporting Plex between them, we hurried through the access panel and into the maintenance crawlway. The narrow passage was uncomfortable for all of us, particularly challenging for Voss's bulky exoskeleton, but it offered blessed stability compared to the reality-warped control room. We had advanced perhaps 50 meters when we felt rather than heard the dimensional cascade hit. The entire academy structure vibrated at frequencies that seemed to penetrate directly into our consciousness. Even within the protected crawlway, reality briefly shimmered around us, but the distortions were muted, manageable. The crawlway is holding, Voss confirmed, checking structural integrity sensors embedded in the walls. We should reach the equipment storage in approximately 200 meters. Our progress was slow but steady, with Plex gradually regaining functionality thanks to Alex's emergency repairs. When we finally reached the equipment storage access hatch, we found it mercifully untouched by the dimensional anomalies. Inside, we discovered exactly what we'd hoped for: portable containment field generators, emergency communication equipment, and medical supplies. Plex was immediately connected to proper diagnostic systems, confirming that Alex's improvised repairs had prevented permanent damage to their core systems. With the emergency equipment, we were able to establish a stable containment field around our position and re-establish communication with Academy emergency response teams. We learned that the dimensional experiment had indeed experienced a catastrophic containment failure, but the effects had been largely confined to the laboratory and adjacent sections. "Rescue teams are inbound," reported the Academy's emergency coordinator. "Remain in your secured position. Dimensional stabilization is proceeding according to protocol." As we waited for rescue, there was finally time to process what we had experienced, and particularly what we had witnessed from our human companion. "Your actions were unexpected," I told Alex directly. "The medical self-treatment was impressive, but this, navigating dimensional instabilities, performing emergency repairs on hybrid technology, these are not capabilities we would associate with a physically vulnerable species." Alex seemed genuinely puzzled by our continued surprise. "It's not about physical capabilities," he explained. "Humans have always specialized in adaptation and problem-solving. We evolved on a planet where conditions change too rapidly for biological specialization to be effective. Instead, we developed pattern recognition, tool use, knowledge preservation, and crisis response." "You displayed no fear," Voss noted, "even when reality itself was becoming unstable." "Fear is useful only when it improves survival chances," Alex replied. "In situations where clear thinking is required, humans have learned to process fear without letting it override other cognitive functions. Like pain," I realized, remembering his self-treatment in the laboratory. "Exactly. Both are just information. Valuable information that shouldn't be ignored, but also shouldn't be allowed to dominate decision-making." By the time rescue teams reached us, the worst of the dimensional instabilities had been contained. Academy medical personnel immediately transferred Plex to advanced treatment facilities, while the rest of us were evaluated for dimensional exposure effects. Remarkably, all of us had avoided serious harm, largely due to our strategic navigation through stable zones and the protection of the maintenance crawlway. When we finally returned to normal Academy spaces, we found the institution buzzing with accounts of the dimensional incident, and particularly of our group's survival and Plex's rescue. Once again, Alex found himself at the center of attention, though the stories now focused less on his pain tolerance and more on his problem-solving and leadership during crisis. Dr. Forlag was among the first to seek us out. The professor's 6 eyes blinked in rapid sequence as he verified our condition. "Extraordinary," he commented, particularly interested in the temporary repairs Alex had performed on Plex's systems. "Without proper training in hybrid technology, without specialized tools, in dimensionally unstable conditions, the probability of success in such circumstances is vanishingly small." "It wasn't just me," Alex pointed out, gesturing to our group. "Voss's strength maintained structural integrity at critical moments. Terria's energy mapping guided us through unstable zones. Zyler's sensory capabilities provided essential early warnings. Plex's systems, even damaged, supplied crucial information about the Academy's infrastructure. It was a generous redistribution of credit, but we all recognized the truth. Without Alex's coordination and quick thinking, our individual capabilities might never have aligned effectively." The Academy director formally recognized our actions during an assembly the following week. Each of us received academic commendations with special recognition. Fourplex's recovery and return to full functionality. The incident highlights a fundamental principle of galactic cooperation, the director noted in her address. True advancement comes not from biological superiority in isolation, but from the combination of diverse capabilities and effective collaboration. Alex seemed almost embarrassed by the recognition, but I noticed a subtle change in his demeanor. The defensive posture he had maintained during his early days at the academy, the careful self-containment of someone expecting dismissal or ridicule, had given way to a more relaxed confidence. He had found his place not by attempting to mimic the biological advantages of other species, but by demonstrating the unique values his own evolutionary path had produced. In the cycles that followed, the Academy's culture subtly shifted. The traditional hierarchy based purely on evolutionary advantages began to incorporate new metrics of capability: problem-solving, adaptability, crisis response, collaborative potential. Dr. Forlag's comparative biology curriculum was formally expanded to include these aspects, acknowledging that the galaxy's survival spectrum was far more complex than previously modeled. For my part, I found my own perspective permanently altered. As a Kthar, I had been raised to value physical advantages and clear evolutionary superiority. I had initially viewed Alex as biologically inferior, an academic curiosity at best. Now I recognized that such assessment frameworks were dangerously limited. Strength manifested in countless forms. A species without natural armor might develop unprecedented pain management and medical self-sufficiency. A species without inherent weapons might create tools of astonishing sophistication. A species without specialized sensory organs might develop pattern recognition capabilities that allowed them to derive extraordinary insights from limited information. And perhaps most importantly, a species without overwhelming individual advantages might develop exceptional collaborative capabilities, the ability to recognize, coordinate, and enhance the strengths of diverse companions. In our final conversation before academic recess, I asked Alex a question that had lingered since our dimensional adventure. When you repaired Plexus systems, that knowledge seemed beyond what you should have possessed. Even Voss, with advanced engineering training, couldn't have attempted such repairs. Alex considered this. Humans have a particular quality that's difficult to quantify, he finally said. We're pattern completers. When we see partial information, our minds naturally try to fill in the missing pieces based on similar patterns we've encountered before. Sometimes we're wrong, but sometimes we make intuitive leaps that bypass formal knowledge requirements. Like seeing a hybrid system for the first time, but recognizing elements similar to other integration technologies? Exactly. It's not magic or special talent, just another adaptation to our evolutionary circumstances. When you can't outrun predators or survive extreme conditions through biological advantages, you develop cognitive workarounds. As our conversation ended and we prepared to depart for academic recess, Alex extended his hand in the human gesture of farewell. I reciprocated, feeling the softness of his skin against my chitinous exoskeleton. The contrast was striking, his physical vulnerability compared to my natural armor. Yet I now understood that this vulnerability had driven his species to develop something perhaps more valuable: the ability to recognize strengths in others, to facilitate cooperation across biological differences, to find solutions where none seemed possible. The human who had appeared so weak when he arrived at Xylos had revealed a different kind of strength, not the immediately visible kind that our academy had traditionally valued, but something perhaps more essential for the complex challenges of an interconnected galaxy. In that moment, I realized that the Xylos Academy had gained far more from Alex's presence than he had from ours. He had not simply adapted to our environment. He had expanded our understanding of what adaptation truly meant. And that, perhaps, was the most remarkable strength of all.